Good evening and welcome to this debate for the mayoral race for New London between the Republican candidate on your right, Raymond Bill Vogel, and the Democrat on your left, Michael Passero. And it is sponsored by the Day and the Chamber of Commerce of Eastern Connecticut and the League of Women Voters. Thank you for coming. The format for the debate will be that each candidate gives a 60-second opening statement, and they tossed a coin, and that choice went to Mr. Vogel. He will make the opening statement, and Mr. Passero will make the final closing statement by his choice. So after those statements, we'll begin to ask questions. Some of them were compiled by editors at the Day, and some of them came from you. And I thank you kindly for contributing questions. I should have introduced myself. I'm Lisa McGinley. I'm the Deputy Managing Editor of the Day, and I'm standing in for Paul Schwanier, the editorial page editor. Each candidate will get 25 minutes total. They can use as much time as they want on any question, and they can respond to each other's answers as well. And volunteers from the League will give them updates periodically on how much time they have left. So we will begin with the opening statement from Mr. Vogel.
Good evening. I want to thank the Day, Lisa McGinley and the Day for sponsoring this debate, and also Tony Sheridan with the Eastern Connecticut Chamber of Commerce. I'd also like to thank the League of Women Voters for putting it on tonight and doing our timekeeping. My goal for tonight is to convince you that I'm the most qualified candidate for mayor. I intend to provide you with examples of some real-world leadership and management experience. Having been a nuclear fast attack submarine captain, I know how to make decisions. I know how to get things done. I know how to maintain high standards. I know how to set up good morale. And I also am able to picture the future. I'm the right person for bringing New London forward with economic development and also with the magnet schools. So I'd like to thank you, and hopefully I'm ready to debate.
Thank you. Mr. Passero?
Yes, thank you, Bill. I'd like to also thank the Chamber, the League of Women Voters, and the Day for putting this on tonight. When I announced my candidacy just about a year ago now, in November 2014, I described it as the longest job interview of my life, and it has been, and it's coming down to the wire, and a week from now, you folks will decide who will be the next mayor of this city. This year-long experience, campaigning throughout the city, being invited into your homes, and having the opportunity to discuss issues facing our city with you has only deepened my commitment to this city and to its people. My service since I was first elected has challenged me and inspired me. I have acquired a deep knowledge of our government from 6 years as a councilor, including 2 years as the first council president, and also 31 years as a New London firefighter. I have lived through the ups and downs of our first 4 years of this new elected mayor system of government. I still believe in the promise that this charter change offers our city. I'm ready to begin. Thank you.
Thank you both. Our first question is directed to both of you, and we'll go to Mr. Passero first. The general idea being to go back and forth on first chances to answer. In statements that you both wrote for the Day's Perspective section, which ran this weekend, you listed your first priorities as mayor. Both of you listed these three: hire professionals to work in the city administration, increase economic development efforts, and oversee the planning and development of the $200 million schools project. Could you please, with those matching priorities, set out for us what sets you apart from your opponent? Mr. Passero.
Well, I have had that. I've been discussing the reason, the importance of restoring professional management in this city since I began the campaign nearly a year ago. I believe it's one of the greatest failings in the last administration over the last 4 years. What sets me apart from Bill on this issue is being on the front lines of the government for the last 4 years. Also being part of the council and the movement that helped change the charter, and understanding what we were looking for in an elected mayor form of government. I believe I'm in a strong position to know what type of professionals we need to lead this city, to lead our departments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vogel?
Yes, the number one priority for me after the election is settled is to get to form up a committee to hire the chief administrative officer. It's going to be an interesting and not an easy task to find the right person to do that, because we don't pay people a whole lot in New London. Plus, we're talking about a 4-year term. And so to bring in the right person with the right qualification is going to be a pretty interesting undertaking. In my professional career, throughout my professional career, I've hired people, I've brought people in and put them in positions to make our projects and whatever our goals are successful. So I think I can do a really good job of hiring the right people, bringing in the right department heads. And part of it is because I've really had a lot of experience doing that. As far as the economic development goes, I think we're probably fairly close on economic development. The thing I would point out the most, though, is that in order for us to have businesses and residents come into town, we have to have taxes such that people have some stability and they know what it's going to be, and it's not too much. We got to remember that we're competitive with all the other communities surrounding New London, and that means that a business or a resident that comes in here has to say, I have a real advantage to living in New London. As far as the magnet schools go, I think the magnet schools have a tremendous potential for bringing in, really helping the city, especially when you consider 3,000 people a day come into the city to work at EB, and if we could turn around the schools, we could really amplify the real estate market here in town. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Passero, do you want to answer that, or shall I move on?
I did answer it.
Yep.
I'm ready to move on to the
You're
next
ready to
question.
move on?
Thank you.
Okay. In the statements that you wrote for the day perspective section, you begin to diverge from each other when you get to the subject of taxation. And Mr. Vogel, this question is for you. You brought it up also, and I want to pursue it a little. A number of members of the audience have written questions such as, what is expected for the future of taxation in New London? How will you address property taxes? Do you have any other ideas? You mentioned leveraging some of the resources of the city. Could you elaborate on that in your answer as well?
Yeah, the only way we're really going to ever get control of taxes in New London over the long run is to increase revenue. We have to increase revenue, and in order to increase revenue, we really have to have economic development, and we have to have the magnet schools. We really got to leverage the magnet schools so people say that I want to send my children to the schools in New London, not that, gee, I don't want to live in New London because the schools aren't that good. That'll make a huge difference as far as bringing people in. That'll improve the economic development. That'll improve our grand list. That'll bring more revenue in. That'll control taxes. And that's kind of what I'm looking at is the chief driver over the long term to control taxes. In the short term, I think we can look at the budgets that we have and start looking at overtime. We can start looking at how we do our contracting, how we do our purchasing. I think there's a lot of improvements that can be made there. But like I say, over the long term, the only solution to taxes in New London is going to be increased revenue, which is going to be caused by economic development and the magnet schools.
Thank you. Mr. Passero?
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. What we need to do in this city is grow our tax base. I intend to concentrate, as we did this year during the budget season, and I'm very proud to be part of this council. We level funded the general government side of the budget, which means we have put a cap on increased government spending. You did see your taxes go up 3.8% this year. That was a reflection of a 1.9% increase in the school budget, or thereabouts. And it was also due to some other calculations when you calculate the mill rate. So I think we can even do better than that. But I understand from being out there, walking door to door, talking with all of you, that the 20% plus increase in taxes over the last 4 years is not sustainable. One of the #1 goals of the next administration is to control that dramatic rise in the taxes, and that's a pledge I've made. I'm going to do that by installing professional management once again to control the ballooning costs of our government, which we're seeing just out of mismanagement. For instance, the increased costs in our liability insurance from $25,000 4 years ago, for $25,000 deductible 4 years ago to $500,000 deductible, and a similar increase in our premiums. That's where your increased taxes are going, not in an increase in services, which is what we need to do. I'd like to get that professional management in place so as mayor, I can concentrate on bringing the businesses in, working with the developers, working with the small businesses, maintaining the business base we have, number one, and then growing it. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question also goes to you first. This time it's your turn to go first. Another wrinkle to tax relief. New London has a small footprint and it has all the demands of a city, which makes it a prime candidate for property tax relief in the form of pilot funds, payment in lieu of taxes funds. The state legislature has passed a measure that, unless they rescind it in the upcoming session, would start to benefit New London from pilot funds. Is that first step enough? And secondly, what is your position on seeking pilot funds from large nonprofits in the city, such as the colleges and the hospital?
Thank you. First of all, I think that the new tiered system that the state has adopted to divvy up the pilot fund money will greatly benefit the city of New London because we are one of the communities with the largest percentage of non-taxable property. So we will get the largest percentage of pilot funds. Now, what we have to understand when it comes to, oh, and by the way, you did allude to the fact that the state legislature did pass that change, but now fast forward 6 months or so, and we find the legislature finds themselves in a serious, the state in a serious deficit money-wise. So there's one moral of the story here, and I've found this in serving on the council. Promises of revenue from the state are rarely ever fulfilled 100%. And that can be whether it be the promises of reimbursement on school grants for construction or the promises for pilot money or ECS grants. Almost every year that we do the budget, we're budgeting in prospective grant money from the state, and the state has fallen short on the projections that were promised throughout the course of the year, and we end up filling those holes. So we have to be very careful. We're dependent on state money, absolutely, but we have to have a better idea of and better control over our own destiny in that regard. I do believe that the tiered system that's come through will help us. That will mean that in actuality, when we talk about the colleges and the large institutions that are nonprofit not paying us, well, actually they are. We will, under the new system, be being reimbursed for the lost taxes by nearly 50% of what they would be paying us. So that's a great stride, and that means a good deal of more revenue for the city. I'm ready to work with that and work with the institutions to see what more we can do to replace the strain that they put on our services and the loss of revenue we have from that non-taxable property. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, the pilot funding situation could be getting a lot better in terms of how much the city gets from the state in revenue. But like Mike has said, depending on the state, is really shaky, especially when you look at the Malloy administration having to go back into special session, having to come up with $400 million to replace. And I'm even worried about whether or not the municipal aid will stay the same. So we could still have a lot of problems this year just based on state funding. So I think that's a very proper concern. As far as the Conn College goes, I'm a strong advocate that we need to press Conn College to contribute more to New London in terms of they're not required to pay taxes, but they certainly have a moral obligation to provide some funding to New London. I think they should give at least $1 or $2 million a year to the city, and I think that's very consistent with what Yale does, what Brown does, what other universities and cities do. And with a $300 million endowment, it seems to me they could well afford to do that. And it would also be a plus because they would be really helping the city that they're in. And if New London thrives, it's that much better for Conn College. If New London sinks, Conn College could sink with us. So I'm an advocate for pressing for getting more from at least Conn College. Mitchell, I don't think has much money, and L&M, I think, is a basket case right now after the Malloy cuts.
Thank you. A member of the audience is wondering about the other side of financing and wants to know what plans do you have to reduce spending in New London City government? Mr. Vogel, you go first.
Well, reducing spending in New London is obviously a main goal, and it's one of those things that each time you do the budget, you have to look and see what the requirements are and what needs to be addressed. One of the chief things that I'm going to look at is overtime. I really think we need to get control of overtime, and we've often gone over budget on overtime in many of our departments in the past. The other thing I want to look at is union contracts and negotiations in order to try to hold the line for the taxpayer. I'm obviously looking to make sure we have a workforce that has a high morale and is well compensated relative to other communities, but we really can't afford to give away the store, and we got to be really careful in that regard. And the other thing is we just have to look at efficiencies, and I think as we get more professional department heads in and get a more professional chief administrative officer, along with my experience in budgeting, I think that we'll be able to really rein it in and hold the line. I know one of the radio hosts that does the talk show on Sunday morning thinks that we should be able to reduce our budget by 65%. I kind of challenge him on that one, but there are people that think that that are business people that look at it and say, hey, you guys can do better.
Thank you. Mr. Passero.
Yes, thank you. I believe, actually, Bill, that that radio host believes that we can reduce our expenses by 25%. And he's very committed in his belief. He's a local businessman that can be accomplished. I'm certainly willing to look at every efficiency that we can find in the way we're running our government. The next mayor is going to inherit a very tight budget. I know because I spent time cutting it. The budget that we were given would have resulted in nearly a 12% tax increase. And as I told you, we got that down to 3.8% with level funding. The government side budget this year is running on essentially the same $44 million that we ran on last year. That's the beginning of controlling spending. You have to understand these costs, and you have to try to find better ways to do it. We've also worked to try to do that throughout the course of the last two councils that I sat on. We hired a company called Expense Reduction Analysts, and they went through the city's purchasing and the city's vending department by department and found efficiencies and cut costs. We're always trying to find efficiencies and cut costs. But I agree with Bill. With professional management installed, that should make the job that much easier. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question on finances before we move on to other topics, and this is on economic development. Mr. Passero, this was for you first. Fort Trumbull is still waiting for its future to begin. What is your strategy, and would you continue having the city work through the RCDA, or would you make changes?
Yes, I believe that I believe in the development corporation model, and I believe one of the failings over the last 4 years is the current administration and the current mayor spent 4 years trying to undercut and abolish the development corporation with really no alternative either that he was offering. When I first got elected 6 years ago, the first organization I reached out to was the then New London Development Corporation to find out what was going on, and it was my first exposure to the group. I've been sitting at their meetings ever since. I believe they're important to this community, and it's nothing unique to New London. Having a development corporation to help promote economic development in the city and to spearhead the development of a beautiful asset like the peninsula at Fort Trumbull is definitely a best practice that I've come to believe in. Now, does that organization need help? Absolutely. It's been hobbled. It's been undercut for 4 years. I believe it needs a budget. I believe it needs an executive director. But I see a board, and I see an executive committee, and I see a membership of that corporation that can deliver for New London and can deliver the dreams that we have for that peninsula. Now, I'm not part of the history of that. I can't support what went on there during the eminent domain fiasco, but I can tell you that New London can recover from that, and we can be proud of what we deliver down on that fort for revenue for the city and development that we can be proud of. I'd encourage everybody to become part of that effort down there, and that means becoming active within that organization, the Development Corporation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vogel.
Yes, I definitely support the NLDC type approach, the development situation. I think it's good to have the people with the caliber that we have on that committee actually looking out for development in New London. I will say, however, I've been disappointed at the level of progress that we have. I'm sure I share that with you. We've had going on a decade or more where nothing's happened, but weeds grow at Fort Trumbull. Now, one of the things that really should happen is the Development Corporation has their heart in the right spot. I think they're trying to do their job. The problem is they don't really have any oversight. And as mayor, what I would do is I would require them to have a project development plan, a plan that actually had some milestones and responsibilities where they actually were held accountable for meeting those. For example, there's a lot of activities that go into getting contractors to come in and developers to come in. And right now, everything that the Development Corporation does is pretty much invisible. Unless you're going to the meetings like Mike does, you don't see what's going on. We don't have any idea. All we know is they talk about bringing in a developer and then it fades. They talk about bringing in another developer and it fades. I really want to see a lot more visibility. I would require the Development Corporation to make a status report once a month to the City Council, reporting on what milestones are coming up, what their prognosis is for success, and who's responsible and who's going to be doing what. We really need a lot more discipline in that whole approach. Right now, I dare say that there's probably nobody in this audience that really has a feel for what steps the Development Corporation is taking and what they will be doing next and what their plans are for the rest of this year, for example. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next question
Can
starts.
I would,
yeah, oh, yes, absolutely.
All right, thank you. First of all, it is a quasi-public agency. The meetings are noticed. Everything is done within the, the Freedom of Information rules. And anybody can partake in that. I can tell you that, yes, I agree. They should be more active and self-promoting in letting the community know what they're doing. And I agree that reports before the City Council would be helpful. But they have, I can assure you, they have been working very diligently. It's a tough economic climate. New London's really hasn't had the best reputation, and all we've been getting is a black eye for the last 4 years in the media. That doesn't help sell the city. They did recently engage a consulting firm called NAI Elite. You'll see the signs up on the properties down in that area of town, actively promoting. They are actively meeting with interested developers. It's a tough slog. There are, you no sooner get somebody that seems like they're really interested and they're real, and they walk away from the table. What I mean to say is they are trying very hard on our behalf, and I think that it's just a matter of putting the economic climate together with putting a better face on our city, and I believe those developers are going to be at the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vogel, do you have anything?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to something that's on a lot of people's minds is the police department. Mr. Vogel, in response to a question posed during your interview with the Day editorial board, you said the department needs a new chief and that your experience as a Navy commander would lead you to believe if a ship had this much trauma, there would be a new commander immediately. How would you resolve the current situation in which the chief, though back on the job, is suing the city?
That's a good question because the state protects the chief of police to prevent political type interference, and so that's a good thing. What we have in the case of Chief Ackley, we know that she is asked to retire before we have a good feel that she's ready to retire under the right circumstances. the right circumstances may not occur as soon as I walk in the door, and therefore, I may well be working with Chief Ackley until such time as she actually does decide to retire. And in doing so, I'll make sure that we have a very professional relationship. I'll make sure that she has complete access. Matter of fact, I would expect her to communicate with me daily and let me know what's going on in the police department and what she needs me to do. And of course, I'd be letting her know what I think I need to have her do. So I think I definitely could work with Chief Ackley and make things happen. But I do think that the police department would be better served if the chief decided to retire and I was able to appoint a new police chief.
Thank you. Mr. Passero?
Thank you. Well, I'm glad to hear that you've modified your position on that a little, Bill, because the way I heard you during the editorial board interviews, you sounded as if you were going to show the chief the door the day you took office. And that just simply doesn't work under our system. I'm not sure that the state statute protects the chief from political interference. That hasn't worked for us for the last 6 years. What I intend to do is to develop a more professional relationship between the administration, the mayor's office, and the chief of police, and I certainly do not intend to micromanage the police department. That has created an enormous amount of havoc in this community, and it has increased our liability, and it is probably one of the greatest, aside from the disaster of public works, it has been one of the greatest contributors to this burden that we're under with the liability insurance, which is going to be one of the greatest problems that the next mayor is going to have to confront, a $500 deductible for every claim that's filed against the city. That's the first $500,000 that the taxpayers are going to have to pay on any lawsuit. So I intend to respect the chief. I intend to respect the law. There are things I can change and things I can't, and her job is protected. And she has the authority of the police chief that I will respect for as long as she intends to stay there.
Thank you. Sticking with the subject of the police department, Mr. Passero, in your interview with the Day editorial board, you described the department as seriously, seriously undermanned and said that as mayor you would turn the department around almost immediately. Recent hires and promotions seem to be a step in that direction. Would you comment on what your plan would be specifically, your strategy in managing, overseeing policing in New London? And secondly, would you focus as well on community policing and canine patrols?
Thank you. As president of the City Council, we adopted an ordinance that requires a minimum of 80 80 members of the police department. That's including the chief on down. We also adopted an ordinance that requires the maintenance of the canine unit. These are important initiatives that have not been fulfilled. One thing is, Mayor, I will respect whatever ordinances are on the books and whatever ordinances the City Council passes. I will execute them. That's the obligation. Those ordinances have not been fulfilled, and they need to be fulfilled. I believe the chief is working towards that already. Since she was brought back from the paid leave that she was on for nearly a year, she has re-engaged in that department. One of her strong strengths is the budget. She's looked at the budget she was given for this fiscal year, and she's begun the hiring process. We've already gone from a dangerously low staffing in the department in the low 60s to somewhere, I'm guessing, around 72 by the time we get those new officers all online. Some of them are already trained. They're called lateral hires, and the training process is greatly abbreviated. Some of them are going through the academy. And by the way, these hiring opportunities are also great opportunities for employment of our youth in this community. So we need to encourage that. As we're able to afford to increase the positions in the police department, we should try to find our own to give those jobs to. I believe very strongly in that. Have I covered all the parts of that question?
Well, community policing.
Oh, community policing. One of the things we have lost as the department was continually losing members over the course of 4 years is our ability to engage in true community policing. with a fully staffed police force, and the minimum there is 80, I believe we'll be able to once again get our police officers into the community, engage with the neighborhoods they work with, engage with the neighborhood associations, and this is where we were. You have to remember where we were before we changed governments 4 years ago. We had a police department staffed at 92. Now, certainly we can't afford 92 officers tomorrow, but our goal should be to at least achieve the minimum of 80 that the city ordinance requires, and then to try to work beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, yes, I think we need to get up to the 80 mark as soon as we can. I'm sure that there's a lot of overtime and a lot of stress put on the police department by having being undermanned like that. And not only that, I'm not sure it's very safe for the community to have the police department undermanned. And as far as community policing goes, I mean, clearly that's the answer. I think we all can sort of understand the value of having a police officers in the community that the residents know and can trust and can go to if they think they have problems. One of the parts of the question that you asked was about the canine units, and I congratulate Mike Passero and the council for actually bringing back the canine units that the mayor had wanted to cut. The canine units are there to protect people, primarily to protect the police officer, and also to prevent people from being shot. You probably remember a case not long ago where the person would have had to have been shot in another community if the police dog hadn't been able to attack and cause that person to not be able to shoot at the police officer. So canine units are a safety factor for our police officers, and they're very effective. If sometimes people say, well, the canine situation can be abusive, particularly to minorities. That is, the only time that would happen is if the police officer himself was not proper. A well-trained police handler is going to make sure that police dog is only used as it should be, and that's against criminals. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Passero, did you want to add anything about the canine unit?
Just to clarify that, we still have not rebuilt the canine unit, unfortunately, and I do hope that process is underway, but certainly I would look to the new administration to make sure that that happens. We did at one time have an award-winning canine unit, and it can be properly managed in a community like New London, so there is no disparate impact by that, which is a well-accepted police technique. Thank you.
Thank you. A member of the audience would like to know, and I think the first person answering this one is Mr. Vogel. If elected, will you require all New London police to wear a body camera during all shifts? Why or why not?
I'm all for the body cameras. I think that they'll help a lot. I think the police officers will feel a lot more confident if they, when they're out on patrol, if they have the cameras on them. I think the policemen are just like you and me. They want to do a good job. They want to do the job that they've sworn to do, and that's uphold the law and protect the citizens. And too often, I think the police get blamed for situations that they're not. That really the criminal is more responsible than the problem was the criminal, not the police officer. And I think the body cameras will go a long way in helping policemen make the case that a situation wasn't abusive by the police. And I think it also is a plus for the citizens because basically they know that any interaction with the police officer is recorded, and if anything goes wrong, it'll be very visible and open to inspection.
Thank you. Mr. Passero.
Yes, I am prepared to oversee the rollout of a body camera program in New London. However, and this ties in with trying to hold back the increase in government spending, that's going to be an expense for the city. It's not something that can be done tomorrow. There's a lot of steps that have to be covered, including buy-in by the employees. The state police are mandated to have that program in place by July 1st. I'm prepared to sit and wait for their regulations. Let them make the mistakes. I don't believe we should go into this new program and incur any kind of expenses that were needless because we were ahead of ahead of the curve on it. I'd rather let other people make the mistakes. And I'd also like to caution the public, and I think there has to be some caution, that this is not going to be a panacea. This is just an extension of when we put the cameras in the vehicles. And as everybody found out, that's not always going to give you the answers you believe are there. So I think it's just going to be another tool in the arsenal, and there shouldn't be so much hype on it. And I believe our first obligation is to roll the program out properly and control the costs. Thank you.
Mike, maybe you'd want to explain why we did the $625,000 bonding, that some of which was for the body cams. If it's going to take a lot of time to roll it out, why are we doing bonding?
Well, first of all, the reason for that was we could not find the money in the budget to cover that cost, and most of that $625,000 bonding went actually for breathing apparatus, Scott air bottles, and turnout gear for firefighters, and we were under mandates from our risk manager to get that done because of liability issues. The body cameras were a small portion, less than $200,000 or about $200,000 of that bonding thing for an initial appropriation of equipment and software. And the reason that we did it is because the city's going to the bond market in November. And so it would be our only opportunity to borrow that money now and have it ready. So we gave the finance department the authority to do that bonding. There was, it was with great reluctance if you followed the council debate on that, because we were very disappointed that this expense was withheld from the council during the budget process. I believe that most of it is general operating expense and should have been included in the general operating budget. It should not have been borrowed, but we had our backs against the wall. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have a time check, please, from our timekeepers?
Yes, can I mention that it would be helpful for us if we could see both of our times at the same time, because it doesn't do me much good to know how much time.
Okay.
So that's how much time I have left?
Mr. Passero has 9 minutes and 20 seconds left, and Mr. Vogel has 12 minutes and 36 seconds left. Okay. Okay. Some problems in the city are not governmental problems per se, but they affect the quality of life. And so we're asking to have you respond to this question about heroin and drug addiction. We have all read of the growing number of people addicted to heroin and painkillers, and we see obituaries related to it. We're aware that first responders are now carrying an antidote in some cases. And clearly many crimes are related to addicts' needs for these drugs. In the spring of 2014, local, state, and federal law enforcement working together arrested scores of people in New London for importing and selling drugs. What could and should the mayor do to provide leadership in this crisis, which is costing lives? And I think, Mr. Passero, it's your turn to answer first.
Yes, thank you. You've really asked me a question on an issue that I consider a priority for New London. I'm on the streets, I see it every day. Our waterfront park is really become a hangout for people with this problem. We see it through all the socioeconomic levels in our community. I don't think there's anybody in this room that doesn't know a family that's struggling with the issue. When I was first elected to the council in 2009, one of my main priorities was to get a handle on the problem, and I see it firsthand from the ambulance service in New London. I successfully got the council to adopt a budget that included a social service coordinator so that we could coordinate all the social service agencies within the city that handle these problems, but have somebody from the city at the table. That position was unfortunately eliminated over the last 4 years, and the situation has once again spiraled out of control. We need to get a handle on that. I intend to find the money in this budget and get a position back on the city payroll to start to manage that problem, and unless you have somebody, a professional, focusing on that solely, it will not work. I want to look at alternatives, like the alternative that the chief of police in Gloucester, the program that he is adopting, where it no longer becomes a criminal issue, where people are encouraged to come in and turn themselves in and get into a program. When we had that social service coordinator position in place, the way I saw it work was they dealt with the individuals. It wasn't a problem of some sort of a here's the problem. It was a problem of individuals, and this person was able to go individual by individual by individual and take each one of those special circumstances and address that. And pretty soon the streets started to get cleaned up, and pretty soon the demands on our ambulance started to drop. There is a way to do it, and I think we need to get to that soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
My biggest concern is that the police and the fire have the ability to administer antidotes to heroin, so that when the 911 call comes in and the police or the fire department responds, that they will be trained and ready to provide an antidote so that the person's life is saved, and then they obviously would be going to the hospital for treatment. I'm not sure the city can really afford to have extensive social services to handle drug addiction per se. I understand what Mike said about the fact that if you clean up the streets, that saves a lot of time, effort, and money, but the city can only do so much, and that to me is not necessarily a mainline, high priority need for the city itself. It's a need, the need I see is an immediate saving of lives, and then medical attention after that under some other program like Medicaid or Medicare or whatever.
Thank you.
I'd like to clarify that.
Sure.
When I was investigating the new position in 2010 as a freshman on the city council, I met with all the social service agencies in this city, and there's a number of them, and when they hungered for the city to be at the table, we're not talking about providing direct services. We're talking about the city having a seat at the table. And this, by the way, is also important to our economic development. Talk to any businessman downtown. The situation is out of control. But it is a human situation. These are human beings that we have an obligation to. We will not be providing the direct services. But the job is not going to be done unless we provide the coordination for all the services that are available in our community to help these people and to help our city in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vogel? Okay. We have another human problem in New London where we have agencies providing meals and shelter and job training for people who are homeless, and even more meals for people who haven't got enough to eat. And we've recently learned that the community meal kitchen is suffering from a great drop in income and can't tell where it's going to be after 2 months. Should municipal government be taking more of a leadership role, and what should the new mayor do to address these problems affecting so many of our residents? Mr. Vogel, I believe you're first.
Yes. I really congratulate the soup kitchens and the other agencies, other volunteer agencies that provide services for the homeless and the needy in that respect. I don't think the city should really be doing any more than it really is. Again, it comes down to priorities. What are the main obligations of the city? What does the city really need to do? It needs to provide public safety. It needs to provide public works. It needs things that are basic requirements. When you start getting into lots of social services with municipal money, you're raising taxes and you're really getting out of the bounds of where the city belongs. What I would do for the situation that you're talking about, where the particular soup kitchen is having trouble getting money to bring the food in, is I would coordinate with all the charitable organizations in town, the churches, and other agencies that provide funding. I know that I'm on the CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant Committee, and I know that we provide money from the Urban Development Department from the federal government, and we allocate money to some of those agencies. But they get money, the money coming in for the food banks, it comes from a lot of different places, and I'm sure it gets tight, but there's a lot of people that are willing to give, and I would certainly lead the charge on the charities providing the food that they do, and what is largely done now.
Thank you. Mr. Passero?
Yes, thank you. Can we see the times a little more often? Okay, there we go. So I'm going to save a little time here because I'm running ahead of Mr. Vogel, and I think I've already answered the question. This is something near and dear to my heart. I believe that social service coordinator is going to be important. I don't think Bill suggests that the mayor is going to have time to do that. It certainly is an issue that I'm committed to, but there's going to have to be a position, a professional in that field to do that for us. To solve, we have a tension in our city. We're always going to provide these services, but we need somebody to help us do a better job. The ambulance should not be going to the shelter to take somebody to the hospital for a temperature. Somebody has to go in there and say, that's not an emergency service. Why aren't you providing cab fare for them? Somebody has to take care of the problem. Yes, we have a wonderful volunteer organization, the Community Meal Center. They will survive. I've supported them for years, but we need to manage that better. The businesses next to it, the neighborhood right next to it, it can't be out of control. So there's a tension there that we have to solve. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to check the times right now? We'll do that from now on after each question, if that's okay. Okay. Thank you. A member of the audience wants to know, and I think this goes to you first, Mr. Passero, what are your feelings about unions, city employee unions, endorsing a candidate? And the person says, personally, I don't think it's right.
Well, it's part of the American process, and I'm proud to accept the endorsement of the employees in this city. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vogel, do you want to comment?
The thing I really worry about is with union endorsements. A union endorses a candidate because they think it's going to be good for that union. And what I worry about is what is good for the union good for the taxpayer? And normally the answer is no. I mean, it's the union's job is to try to do as much as it can for its employees, and the taxpayers aren't really part of the equation unless it's indirect. So I worry about unions, especially public service unions that have sort of a, if you look at the pattern, they normally will support a Democratic candidate with both endorsements and money, and then when the Democrat candidate comes around the next time, what happens is they're negotiating with that union. And to me, I'd like to see that cycle broken a little bit. I think with a Republican mayor like me, that's probably one difference between Republicans and Democrats in this case. I think other than that, we're pretty close on a lot of issues. But I would really try to make sure that the taxpayer comes first when it comes to negotiations with unions. And I would like to make sure that in the case of public service unions, we're real careful about giving away the store on pensions and health care.
I don't see a reason to single out labor unions. Campaigns get money from all sorts of interests, including business interests. And as long as the candidate has some integrity, the people making donations know that it's not pay for play, then there's no problem. It does not corrupt the process. It's all up to the integrity of the candidate. Thank you.
Thank you. The subject may come up again in the future of the Coast Guard Academy needing some expansion space. What would be your position on negotiating for a sale of part of Riverside Park? And the first person, I think, is Mr. Vogel on this one.
Yeah, we certainly went through that before, and basically, I think the people of New London want to recognize that the Coast Guard Academy is a major stakeholder in the community, and I think that New London loves the Coast Guard. We've seen lots of those hearts around town. So I don't think there's any lack of respect for the Coast Guard or any lack of people wanting to go out of their way to help the Coast Guard. And the problem that we had last time the Coast Guard indicated they wanted part of Riverside Park is they didn't really make a very good case for it. I mean, the people that were opposed to it made a very good case against it. The Coast Guard made a very weak case for it, and as a result, they lost their the election on that. If the Coast Guard needs space again, I don't know whether it be Riverside Park or not, but I think the Coast Guard would have to make a very compelling case that they needed to expand, and that they would have to they would have to convince most of the people, the vast majority of people in New London, that they had a compelling case. I would expect a whole lot more from the Academy in trying to sell the public on something like that. And if they really needed it, and if they really made the case, and if most of the people in New London thought it was a valid request, I think we would support it and help the Coast Guard Academy, because we certainly want to keep that stakeholder here in New London.
Thank you. Mr. Passero?
I was strongly against the sale of Riverside Park. I disagree with Bill in one place. I think that both sides made their cases very strong, since the vote was fairly evenly split with, I believe the Coast Guard won initially and then lost by 14 votes. So it was very close, but I would not support selling that park. I didn't support it then. I would support helping the Coast Guard find additional land for expansion. At the time, I did talk with Admiral Burho, who was the superintendent at the time, about other opportunities in East New London that were available, and also fairly close to the campus. So I think there are other alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you. There are a number of questions that seem to point to the subject of charter and charter revision. One person asks if the city clerk is a function of the legislative or executive branch of the government. And we know in New London the city clerk is not independently elected. So in general, on that issue and any others, would you be supportive of charter change, perhaps charter review committee being appointed by the mayor in the near future? And the first person to answer that is Mr. Passero.
Yes, thank you. So I did support and I did propose the establishment of a charter review board. That board is already working. I think we all recognize there's a lot of flaws in this charter. I did not want to impanel an official statutory charter review revision commission. Back when there was a clamor for it early in this administration, I thought it was too soon. That under this next council, I do anticipate there will be impaneled at some point a charter revision commission. The idea behind having a charter review board working now is, I believe, that they will produce a white paper. They are building consensus in the community as to what needs to be changed. And when that charter revision commission is impaneled, which then will start the strict statutory process for amending our charter, they will have a leg up on that. And I think we'll be putting a lot more thought into the process. I do support a number of changes. We know that the Board of Ed needs to have staggered 4-year terms. That's the best practice now. We know we have to reform the way we do our finances. We probably need a controller. The City Council needs more support to do its job. There's a lot of things, and that's why I think it was important to get a community, a committee of people to study that, and I'll tell you what, I am very pleased with the hard work they're putting in. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr.
Yes,
Vogel.
I think that we do need a charter revision commission. We do need to modify the charter. There's some particularly glaring errors or glaring situations there. One of them is the petitioning referendum process for budgets needs to be modified so that a referendum occurs at a reasonable time after a petition. As you know, under Mayor Finenzio, he delayed the referendum all the way to November when most of the budget had already, or a good chunk of the budget had already been spent. So it was really sort of a slap in the face to the taxpayer, because the petition and referendum didn't mean anything because it was delayed so long. Another thing we need to do is we need to change the veto override for the mayor. It should be 5 out of 7 councilors to override a veto. Right now it's 6 out of 7 councilors to override a veto. So that really hurts, that really makes it tough to govern. The mayor really can pretty much get his way if he has just one person, 1 or 2 people that are going to support him. Another area that I think needs some help is and we saw it this last time, is the city attorney pretty much works for the mayor. People would question that, but when you look at who's the primary client, it really appears to be the mayor, and I can explain why if we need to. But I really think the city council, in the rare cases when they have a contest or a conflict with the mayor, should be able to hire their own attorney to handle the situation that's being talked about. Another important thing I think for the charter is we need to allow property owners and business people that own property in the city to vote, to be able to sign petitions and vote in referendums. There should be no issue of taxation without representation, and that's clearly what we have with these property owners that are not part of the city. Those are just a couple of the things that I'd like to see modified.
Thank you. Sort of as a follow-up to that, would you please talk about how, as mayor, you would work with the city council and what your understanding of that relationship is? Mr. Vogel, you're first.
Yes, it's two separate departments of the government, if you will. The mayor runs the executive, and the council is really the legislative branch. The council is responsible for basically approving funding and taxation, and the mayor really needs to run the city. As you might recall, not too long ago we had a city manager, and the city manager was hired in for his management experience. There were several requirements that were specific to his ability to manage. When we changed the charter, we gave all those management requirements to the mayor. And one of the things I think is important is that the person that's the mayor has a lot of management experience, like I have, so I think that that would be an important consideration. As far as working with the council, I think mostly it's a matter of communications. Good people with goodwill and willing to reach a solution, to reach a compromise. I think it's very important to communicate with the council in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's just with an individual, sometimes it's with a group of individuals, sometimes it's as I would go to all the council meetings and make sure that the issues are, that I can explain situations that the councils are interested in. And if I know something's coming up, I'll make sure the department head that's responsible also comes to the council meeting to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Passero?
So I certainly know the failings of the last 4 years and how to correct that. Having been on the City Council for 6 years, I have a lot of government experience, both in local government here and through my law practice and my legal education. It is important to communicate, but what's important for the mayor to remember is those are 7 volunteers that meet on the 1st and 3rd Mondays of the month. The mayor has to be in the room. I intend to be in the room. The mayor has to communicate to those councilors where we're at on the budget, where we're at in city administration. So communication is key. I intend to be at every meeting and also their committee meetings. And also the government's run by committees and commissions. I intend to participate in as many of those as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple of minutes left, 3 minutes for Mr. Vogel and 2 minutes roughly for Mr. Passero. Earlier this year, a lot of American cities experienced great anxiety and disruption and pain over race relations. Would you say New London's in a good place with racial relations? And if it needs improving, do you have a strategy for what should be done? Mr. Passero first.
Well, thank you. Certainly one of my goals is to increase the staffing in our police department so we can get back in the communities and make that connection. I think it's very important to have a healthy, engaged community policing program. The other thing I intend to do is to connect very closely with our faith communities. One of the strengths of New London is our numerous faith communities. I've gotten to know many of these communities and their pastors and their ministers, and I believe that that's one of the keys. I have always had a belief that we were a wonderful, diverse community, but then again, I'm a white male. So I have privileges and I have biases that I might not even recognize. So it's important to communicate, and I intend to be out there with all elements of the community and working to make sure that we really set the standards in our relationships here in New London. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, the thing that I really am concerned about when it comes to working with any group of people or whether it's individuals or groups is a Vogel administration will be fair and will respect the individual person or the individual group or whoever it is. People respond to being treated fairly and being treated respectfully. So I think that's the key. Now, that's not just me and my administration. That's the police, that's the fire, that's the public works, that's everybody. When it comes time for example, public works, you're not going to see mattresses piled high on the street anywhere in town, whether it's a poor community, a middle-class community, or a wealthy community, where we're going to be treating every community fairly and justly, and that to me is really important. Do we have a problem with race relations in New London? I think we're very blessed because I think the city has gotten along very nicely with all the different groups. I mean, you look at the city council, it's you got a cross-section of people. Everywhere you look in New London, you have different groups of people, from different ethnicities that are working very well together. So I think that's going pretty well. There may be some people that feel that there's areas that we need to improve, and I certainly would be open to listening to that and trying to make sure we're making those improvements. But some of the things that are going on, like the body camera thing for the police, a lot of those things are going to really help. And so I think New London's blessed compared to a lot of other cities.
Thank you. And we are down to 1 minute and 1 minute and 1 minute. Okay. Why don't we, rather than trying to squash a question into 1 minute, why don't we go to the closing statements, and you can have an extra minute each. So they will be 2.5 minutes long, up to that, as long as you want. Okay, up to 2.5. Mr. Vogel goes first.
Well, one of the things I didn't have a chance to talk about yet, and I'll take a little bit of time to talk about, is the magnet schools. We've talked about how important they are to the community, and one of the things that I really want to press hard for as mayor is to make sure that, well, let me just say this. Educators are not usually the best project managers. They're really good at teaching, but they aren't too good at being developers or builders. So when we have this $200 million project, we really need to make sure that we have that the project has the visibility that's required to ensure that it's moving along and that it's going to, the cost at completion will be what we expect. We need to see very good project plans for that. We need to know what the major milestones are. We need to know what the schedules are, who's responsible, and we need to have regular reports by the Board of Ed to the City Council and the Mayor as to how we're coming along on spending that $200 million. That is so much money, and it's so important to New London. We cannot afford to fail. We need to really, really keep our eye on the ball when it comes to this construction program that we have coming up. It's, like I say, it's just too important to fail, and it's too important to just leave with the Board of Education alone, or just to say, well, I trust the superintendent, because the superintendent's interested in a lot of other things besides building on a day-to-day basis. So we really need to do that. The other thing I really want to make sure is successful is, in terms of the magnet schools, I want to make sure that the New London taxpayer doesn't get hit with extra taxes because we're not getting sufficient funding for out-of-district students. Right now, the city of Groton pays New London tuition of $3,000 per student. It costs New London probably 5 to 6 times that much to educate a student. Now, there's state grants that come in there, and if you have a situation where it's like 25% out-of-district students in a class, you're probably breaking even. But as you go up in cost, as you go up in the percentage of students from out-of-district, you end up, the tuition doesn't cover it. And not only that, but I'm concerned about the increase in buildings that we need, and I'm concerned about the maintenance of the buildings that we have. So we really, really need to focus on that and make sure it goes well. I think everybody's intentions are good, but we got to make sure it has the visibility so that we can be sure it's managed well.
Thank you. Mr. Passero.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to Before I go into my closing statement, I have to respond to that because, Bill, I'd invite you to start attending the school building and maintenance committee meetings. They meet once a month, but the work goes on. Many, many more meetings than that. One of the things I've devoted myself to in the last 4 years is getting a handle on our school construction projects. I have made sure that the 21st Century School Construction Project, that's the last project, it's a $60 million project that we're closing out, does not end up like a disaster like Jennings School, which has nearly brought the city's finances to its knees. If you want to know why we're having a problem, it's because the Jennings School Construction Project was so grossly mismanaged. We're still struggling with that today. I've made sure that the 21st Century School Construction Project is going to be closed out properly. And that was, by the way, thanks to picking out professionals and hiring the right people to get it done. We also have those professionals at the table to make sure that the $200 million school construction project that we're embarking on is going to be properly managed. I am making sure that this time those jobs and the benefit of that construction project benefits New London first. We need local jobs, and we need the value of that project to benefit our local companies and our local vendors. I am making sure, fighting right now, month after month I have been fighting to make sure that happens. That project is well underway. Everything he asked for is there and available. Now I want to tell you, and I want to thank once again all of you for being here tonight. I've said this before, personal ambition does not drive me to seek this office. I've achieved my goals. What motivates me is the ambition that I share with many of you in this room, and that is to see New London succeed. Together, united, this beautiful city by the sea will regain the greatness that we once had. My campaign motto has captured this moment. It's our city, it's our future, it's our time. I'm in a place right now in my life that allows me this opportunity to serve. I'm grateful for the life that New London has given me, and I'm anxious for the opportunity to give back. Whether you've lived in the city your entire life, or whether you've just arrived, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Green, or unaffiliated, no matter your ethnicity or your economic circumstances, your gender or sexual identity, we all wear our Whaler pride on our sleeve. If you've been disenfranchised, I promise you, City Hall will be open. All of the talent that's on the sidelines needs to get back in the game. Together we can send a message to the region, the state, and the country that New London is open for business. Thank you.
Thank you all. This concludes our debate.